Saludos amigos, los invitamos a escuchar la mesa redonda de Roundtable, donde discutimos los temas del día, hablando de política, educación y otros temas locales, regionales y mundiales. Por Usa la Radio. Señores oyentes de Usa la Radio, estamos aquí de nuevo con su programa La Mesa Redonda de Roundtable desde el corazón de la ciudad del amor fraternal. Les habla Fernando Mendez, Dani Ramos, controlando la máquina digital. Y tenemos noticias locales, nacionales y mundiales. Noticias internacionales. Hoy, seriamente, hablando sobre dos cosas que están ocurriendo. COVID continúa aumentando en números, a pesar de que también aumentan las vacunas. En este momento, según las promesas del presidente Biden, se acerca ya el país a una mayoría de adultos con vacunas y ahora, a principios de mayo, según lo que se anuncia, todo el mundo que quiera una vacuna podrá obtenerla. Por supuesto que hay gente todavía que no quieren vacunarse, pero eso tiene su propio remedio. Si no se vacunan, pues disminuye el número de gentes que se oponen a la vacuna, naturalmente, orgánicamente. Así que si usted se ha vacunado, felicitaciones. Si tiene la segunda vacuna, pues todavía mejor. Y continúa pues la controversia con J&J, Johnson & Johnson, la vacuna. Algunas gentes señalan que hay dificultades con esa vacuna, también hay dificultades con Pfizer. En Europa, por ejemplo, hay una vacuna que no se permite, pero en general, el mundo en este momento está mejor porque se ha vacunado. En Chile se ha llegado a un punto en que las vacunas han aumentado y se ha combatido el virus con éxito. En Estados Unidos, bueno, en el mundo entero, en ese momento hay más de 141 millones de casos y más de 3 millones de gente han muerto. En este país, como ya sabemos, han pasado más de los 550,000 muertos en este país como resultado del COVID y continúa porque la terquedad de la gente de no operar como nos sugieren los médicos, de usar las mascarillas, es lo más efectivo. Por supuesto que hay que seguir todas las normas que nos indican de lavarnos las manos con frecuencia, de evitar estar demasiado cerca de otras gentes, ¿no? De esto de la distancia que se requiere, que son 6 pies. Para los niños en las escuelas se ha reducido a 3 pies, pero eso se hace por conveniencia. En donde sea posible mantener más distancia, pues se hará. Esto de las escuelas, pues continúa la controversia. Hay muchos padres que no quieren enviar a sus hijos, hay muchos profesores que todavía resisten empezar a enseñar de nuevo en un recinto, en un salón de clase en el cual no se sienten seguros, que están a salvo de contagios. Pero esto también se va remediando poco a poco, mientras que el país avanza en cuanto a las vacunas, vacunando a profesores, a estudiantes. Ahora, como anunciamos, pues mucha gente se ha operado ya. Una mayoría, vamos a llegar pronto a esto que llaman herd immunity, la inmunidad del rebaño. Quiere decir que una mayoría de la gente, un 75%, estará vacunada. Y entonces eso queda nomás que entre un 25 y un 30% que resisten. Y como digo, pues eso tiene un remedio natural. Porque si habrá gente que sin vacunarse, pues no se van a contagiar. Por alguna razón, este virus no ataca por igual a todo el mundo. La vacuna tampoco afecta a todo el mundo por igual. Hay gente que ha tenido efectos muy fuertes como resultado de la vacuna. Otros, para la mayoría de nosotros, simplemente el brazo duele. Pero eso se acaba pronto. El, otros efectos secundarios que mucha gente que dice que dolores del cuerpo y tienen fiebre, etcétera. Pero esto también pasa. Muy raro, solamente 6 casos que supimos, gente que sufrió resultados adversos, mujeres entre la edad de 18 y 42, algo así, que sufrieron, una de ellas murió, pero solamente 6 casos en cerca de 7 millones. Así que estadísticamente, por eso hay muchos que se quejan de que tal vez fue una medida muy drástica el suspender la vacuna por 6 casos, pero bueno, eso es asunto de los médicos, los estadistas que van a hacer. La otra gran noticia que vamos a comentar más a fondo tiene que ver con la renuncia de Raúl Castro. Ha tocado a su fin el régimen de la familia Castro en Cuba. Ahora, para quienes estamos en ese momento sintiendo demasiado optimismo, recordemos que ellos tienen una garra tan fuerte sobre el gobierno cubano, tienen tanto apoyo del pueblo, porque el pueblo ha sido inmunizado contra ideas democráticas, que esto va a continuar por un rato. Ya podrán ver que habrá otra persona a la cabeza del gobierno cubano, que no será un Castro, pero que podrá mantener el gobierno organizado por nosotros. Sin embargo, recuerdo siempre cuando murió Tito, que estaba en control de Yugoslavia. Una idea un poco diferente. Yugoslavia, en realidad, pues se había compuesto de un montón de grupos étnicos diferentes, ¿no? Serbios, croatas, y entonces era una composición de gentes de una cultura a veces bastante diferente. Y que luego que murió Tito, pues se destruyó y ahora quedan países pequeños como Montenegro y Serbia. Eso no va a pasar en Cuba, por supuesto, pues es más homogéneo. No hay estados cubanos, pero sí puede haber diversas opiniones en Cuba en cuanto a esto, y habrá un llamado más fuerte de volver a la democracia, luego de más de 60 y tantos años de un gobierno nada demócrata. ¿Cuándo fue? 59. Ok, aquí estamos, 40 y 20, 61 años del gobierno de los Castro. Eso es para la historia. Cuando Fidel Castro empezó su dictadura y con el apoyo de la Unión Soviética, porque era marxista, él y Che Guevara agarraron el gobierno de Cuba. Bueno, cuando llamé a un amigo para ver si quería discutir este asunto hoy, me dijo, bueno, pues mejor háblale a un cubano, porque yo soy argentino y nosotros odiamos a Che Guevara. Así que él no quiso participar, bueno, no pudo participar. Pero eso es verdad, los argentinos no quieren para nada esto de Cuba. Bueno, vamos a tomar una breve pausa aquí en USA la Radio. Les habla Fernando Mendez, Dani Ramos, controlando la máquina digital. No se vayan, regresamos en un segundo. Saludos amigos, los invitamos a escuchar la mesa redonda de Roundtable, donde discutimos los temas del día, hablando de política, educación y otros temas, locales, regionales y mundiales, por USA la Radio. Señores oyentes de USA la Radio, estamos aquí de nuevo en su programa La Mesa Redonda. Les habla Fernando Mendez, Dani Ramos, controlando la máquina digital, y estamos hablando sobre Cuba, el fin del gobierno de los Castro. Vamos a ver qué pasa en Cuba con esto. Bueno, hechos históricos estamos viviendo en este momento, el fin de una era para la Gran Bretaña con la muerte del príncipe Felipe, y ahora una era que termina también para Cuba con la dimisión del poder de Raúl Castro. Así que termina el nombre de los Castro en Cuba. Sin embargo, para los que estamos demasiado optimistas de que algo va a cambiar radicalmente en Cuba, de repente no. De repente continúa ahí este agarre que tiene el marxismo, el socialismo, como lo llaman ellos, en Cuba. Luego vamos a leer más de lo que dice don Raúl Castro al respecto. Y por el otro lado, pues estamos hablando del COVID y cómo ha progresado el asunto de las vacunas y por dónde vamos en este momento. En realidad, se ve, esto de la proverbial luz al final del túnel. Aquí estamos, se ve la luz al final del túnel. Bueno, tenemos, además de lo de los Castro, terminando en Cuba, tenemos otras cosas, pues por supuesto hay noticias locales, nacionales e internacionales que tal vez nos sirvan más para hablar sobre otros asuntos que no sea la política de Cuba. Es algo interesante el efecto que tuvo un personaje como Fidel Castro sobre la política de todo un continente. Él y su compinche Che Guevara, cómo se las arreglaron para propagar por toda la América Latina en donde pudieron, creando el caos y llevando la influencia de la Revolución Cubana. Desafortunadamente, en Latinoamérica siempre el marxismo ha encontrado terreno fértil, porque, bueno, pues en Latinoamérica estamos reaccionando en contra de las dictaduras militares de Perón en Argentina, Rojas Pinilla en Colombia, Somoza, Batista en Cuba, Somoza en Nicaragua. Estamos reaccionando contra eso, y entonces, pues, el pueblo, siempre oprimido, tenía esperanzas de ver un mejor futuro. Vamos a hablar de eso más tarde. Aquí en Pensilvania, por el momento, former U.S. Representative Lou Barletta, un aliado del presidente, el expresidente Trump, ha tomado otro paso para llevar su candidatura a gobernador en el año 2022 y ha formado un grupo de acción política, un PAC. Former U.S. Representative Lou Barletta, considered an ally of former President Donald Trump, took another step toward running for Pennsylvania governor in 2022 by recently forming a PAC focused on state issues. That's from the Inquirer, Philadelphia Inquirer. Campaign filing disclosures from candidates for the 2022 U.S. Senate race show that Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman has already spent more than half of the $3.9 million he raised in the first quarter, while nearly half of GOP candidate Jeff Bartos' $1.1 million haul was a loan from himself. So Jeff Bartos apparently believes in his candidacy enough to put his money where his mouth is, so to speak. State Health Department Acting Secretary Allison Bean has raised concerns about vaccine hesitancy across the state, noting that hundreds of appointments of COVID-19 vaccine providers remain open and nearly half of the state's nursing home workers have declined the vaccine. That's according from the Associated Press. Okay, we do have something to say about that. If you are a health worker, it's okay. You're responsible for yourself. That's fine. But by not accepting the vaccine, you're jeopardizing, endangering the lives of the people you care for, people under your care, elderly people who are, as we know, vulnerable. So, state health department, the government of Pennsylvania, the authorities have to take steps because these people are acting against medical advice to put in jeopardy the health of, who knows, thousands of elderly people who come into contact with them. So this leads me to comment on the fact that eventually the government, airlines, hotels, any means of transportation, even trains and buses, may require you to show the card that you have been vaccinated. Why not? If that is a passport to health, if that is the only way we can explain to the people that you need to do this, take steps to protect not only yourself, but to protect the population. Because by not accepting the vaccine, they are rejecting something that helps the population at large, not just them. And this is an absurd proposition that I am free to do as I wish, because that's not true at all. If you are spreading disease that kills people, you should not be allowed to perform your duties as a caregiver for elderly people. So, the State Department of Health should report these people to the authorities. I don't know. Something has to be done. Maybe a law. Well, who's going to pass a law, especially in this Republican-controlled legislature in Harrisburg? Nothing's going to be done because there are so many people opposed to the vaccine in that august body. County election board officials around the state are overwhelmed by preparations to process another round of expected mail-in votes for the May primary. Another disease that we have kept alive from the Trump administration, the fear of voting by mail. We don't have the fear. The Republicans have that fear. They fear that more than COVID. They fear the vote. They fear democracy more than COVID. Black leaders in Harrisburg fear the possible consequences if Derek Chauvin, the former Minnesota police officer facing murder charges in the death of George Floyd while in police custody, is acquitted. For those of you who have no memories of this, remember the consequences of finding not guilty a white person who committed a crime against a black person. There will be riots, and the states have to be prepared. So the states are taking steps right now. The nation is taking steps to prepare for this. It is absurd that the consequences of a jury's decision could be harmful to the peace of the nation. That's where we are right now. That is how divided we are in terms of race, in terms of politics, that the consequences of a jury decision could be riots in the streets if that decision is not acceptable to the black population. Not all blacks, but to a very vocal and active group of people who will be marching. Black Lives Matter will be out there. And this is in the context of many injustices committed against black and brown people in this country. But we should keep in mind that these are legal steps taken, legal happenings within the context of a trial, that a man can be found guilty or not guilty by a jury. And we should respect the law. There are ways to appeal that decision. But in no case can we appeal a decision by means of a riot, by means of violent demonstrations. And this is where the leadership of the black people, political leaders who have a say, who have a voice, who can be heard, this is where they will call for calm, for understanding, for peace. Because we don't know. I mean, that is why a jury will hear arguments from both sides so they can decide. And what are we going to do? By violent means, convince this jury of the guilt or innocence of a citizen. He has the rights that we all have to a trial, to a proper trial. He has the rights that we all have to be found guilty or not guilty, innocent of all charges. So it's another lesson that we must learn. That's not how the law works in this country. But there are violent people ready to impose their point of view by means of burning and rioting. So let's hope not. Let's hope that peaceful demonstrations actually prevail, if there are any, if there is a call for that. So, señores oyentes de Úsala Radio, estamos aquí en la mesa redonda, les habla Fernando Mendez, Dani Ramos controlando la máquina digital. Regresamos en un momento. Saludos amigos, los invitamos a escuchar La Mesa Redonda, The Roundtable, donde discutimos los temas del día, hablando de política, educación y otros temas, locales, regionales y mundiales, por Úsala Radio. Señor siguiente de USA la Radio, estamos aquí de nuevo con su programa La Mesa Redonda. Les habla Fernando Mendez, Dani Ramos, controlando la máquina digital. Y continuamos aquí con los comentarios y noticias y titulares del día. The FBI is investigating the FBI investigating expenditures of more than 13.5 million on real estate projects in Harrisburg made by Pennsylvania Public Educators Pension Fund, PSERS. It's a report from the Philadelphia Inquirer. So pay attention, follow the money. There's usually some corruption if the FBI is investigating. State Republicans are preparing new legislation to tighten voting requirements, although most of the proposals will likely be vetoed by Governor Wolf. Okay, thank you, Governor Wolf, stopping this nonsense. Delaware County Council Vice Chair Monica Taylor went through a political trial by fire as COVID raged through her first year in office. The New York Times reports on how residents of Canonsburg are reacting to President Joe Biden's plan to bring U.S. troops home from Afghanistan by September. That is one of the headlines of the week, of the year. We are leaving Afghanistan. And the date of the departure of the final, the last troops from Afghanistan is very telling. It's 9/11/2021. So think about that date, because it was 9/11/2001, exactly 20 years ago, that George Bush started this war. And we have no right to do that. But, and as we leave, some historians, some commentators are saying that as we leave Afghanistan after promising to leave a government capable of ruling, the Taliban will march right in, and all the advances of the last 20 years in that country with respect to women who are now able to get an education to become doctors and lawyers and PhDs, all these women will be the main victims of a return of the Taliban, one of the most ignorant people on earth. U.S. Senator Pat Toomey should support universal background checks for firearm purchases, and gun violence must be treated as a public health epidemic, as a physician Daniel Walk writes in the Penn Capital Star, saying that Pat Toomey should support universal background checks. Republicans don't support anything that has to do with control, arms control, gun legislation, etc. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette writes that the state should find a way to avoid shutting down its unemployment benefits website for 2 weeks while the website undergoes a scheduled June overhaul. Yeah, take into account that people depend on this and they are living day to day depending on this aid. So please have pity. So I'm going to spend some time talking about Raul Castro and his departure. It's something that should be highlighted with more emphasis in this country. The Castro government changed the political picture of Latin America, and they changed the politics in this country. Remember JFK, Bay of Pigs. What else can we say about that? And then the ensuing decades of brainwashing by the Marxist government of Fidel Castro and his brother Raul, who took over from Fidel when Fidel was unable to continue. But now Raul has turned in his resignation. This is the headline. Raul Castro announced his resignation as head of the Communist Party of Cuba on Friday. So he's not only the head of the party, he's the head of the government. And he steps down as the de facto leader of the country, the 89-year-old politician. 89 years old. Imagine, we're complaining about President Biden. What's Biden? 76, 77. And this guy was 89 years old, still making decisions for his country. Why? Because he could. Because they control that. They control the island. They own everything. Remember, the principles of Marxist hegemony, Marxist control of a country is that it controls the means of production. It owns everything. There are videos of, not so much Fidel Castro, but yeah, I'm sure there are Fidel Castro videos too, but of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela going around saying, Mr. So-and-so, you own this factory, right? And the guy says, yes. And with great pomp and circumstance, Hugo Chavez, whose hero was Fidel Castro, says, well, you don't own it anymore. It's owned by the state. And that is how they confiscated property, private property. That's how Castro did it. That's how Hugo Chavez did it. That's how the Noriega, the Nicaraguan government with a Marxist at the head of the government did it too. Daniel Ortega. So, and that's what Chile in the 1970s. That's what Chile was saved from becoming another haven for Marxist governments. Think about that. Chile was saved, but then Chile fell under the dictatorship of a military man who was just as evil as many others, Pinochet. But that's another story. Anyway, so the end of the Castro government. Think about that, 1959, Cuban Revolution, and his march of Castro and his troops into Havana. I just saw a segment of Ernest Hemingway. It's on PBS. It's a story of, it's a biography on video, narrated about Ernest Hemingway, who had lived in Cuba for decades. He had a house outside Havana, a house in the mountain where he could see the city from there. And Hemingway loved Cuba, but when the revolution happened, he was already living in Idaho, the mountain in Idaho too, and that he realized that he would never be back in Cuba. He lost everything that he had because now everything that was there was owned by Fidel Castro. It's incredible that this mindset, this Marxist solution to all our difficulties as a society could be sold in Latin America. So we have to celebrate with hesitation the end of the Castro regime. It doesn't mean that Cuba is now automatically returning to democracy. It does mean, however, that there is that possibility that the free market forces will bring democracy back to Cuba. We'll see. It depends who takes over from Raul Castro. He must be fairly certain that whoever can take over from him has the power to control the country. For him to have offered his resignation. So this is what the article says about his resignation. While a successor was not immediately identified, observers believe Miguel Díaz-Canel, who has served as president since 2018, to be the likely candidate. Despite being 60 years old, Díaz-Canel is viewed as a party traditionalist who can appeal to a younger generation of Cubans while favoring a moderate amount of economic opening. I have news for Mr. Díaz-Canel. Just try a modest opening, a modest economic opening. Remember glasnost and perestroika. That's what happened in Russia, in the Soviet Union. A little glasnost and a little perestroika. Try it, Mr. Díaz-Canel. And let's see what happens in Cuba. And give them a taste of what the real world is like. Give them a taste of freedom. Let them listen to everything that comes their way. Let them listen to television that is not the official word of the state. Let them listen to the radio. We'll see. We'll see how long, Mr. Miguel Díaz-Canel, how long you can sustain this dictatorship without the name Castro attached to the government. Okay? All I say to that is remember Tito, because he held on. Remember people like Stalin, those names that inspire fear and inspire the people to follow them. I don't think you have, Díaz-Canel has the same, it's made of the same fiber. We'll see. The change comes as Cuba faces one of its worst economic crises in recent history, battling the dual impact of U.S. renewed sanctions and the pandemic. Okay, that's not the first time. Remember, Cuba forever has gone through periods of great trouble, great crisis, because we know Marxism looks great on paper. This great idea of a paradise for the poor, equality for everybody, property owned by the state that will be distributed equally to every citizen. That's on paper. The reality was that Fidel Castro became one of the richest men in the world, along with all the other dictators that from left and right, from Franco to Pinochet. Fidel Castro was no different. He was a thief of the wealth of the nation. And that continued with his brother, and now we have a follower. We'll see how they can do it. I don't think that they will survive that way. But anyway, so we're going to take a brief pause here in USA Radio. Les habla Fernando Mendez, Dani Ramos controlando la máquina digital. Regresamos en un momento. Saludos amigos, los invitamos a escuchar la mesa redonda de Roundtable, donde discutimos los temas del día, hablando de política, educación y otros temas, locales, regionales y mundiales, por USA la Radio. Señoras y señores de USA la Radio, les habla Fernando Mendez, Dani Ramos controlando la máquina digital. Estamos aquí de nuevo con su programa, la Mesa Redonda de Roundtable. Estamos hablando de Cuba, las consecuencias del fin, el nombre del mandatario en Cuba no será Castro. Don Raúl Castro acaba de terminar su servicio al país a los 89 años de edad, se ha jubilado, a disfrutar de su riqueza, porque ya sabemos que los Castro se enriquecieron. Dios mío, con el apoyo de un pueblo esclavizado por una teoría de gobierno que no sirve para nada. This is what happened. The country's economy shrank by an estimated 11% last year. About 16% of the migrants, 16% of the migrants arriving at the U.S. southern border in February were Cubans seeking asylum. Okay, think about that. You know the geography. How would Cubans come to the U.S. border seeking asylum? Where would they go first? Mexico. So Mexico has always been a friendly territory for Cuba because obviously they share an equal resentment of the U.S. And especially now with AMLO in charge, López Obrador, who has always been resentful of the United States, now he's in charge of Mexico. So more power to López Obrador helping the Cubans. Se ha demandado el ejercicio privado de algunas profesiones, mientras que a los demás no se les permite. Eso señaló a don Raúl Castro en cuanto a el fin de su gobierno y la posibilidad de que venga una economía capitalista a Cuba. Dice que el ejercicio privado de algunas profesiones y a las demás no se les permite. ¿Por qué? Esto señala él. Parecería que el afán de egoísmo inicia el proceso del desmontaje del socialismo. Por ese camino se destruirían los sistemas de salud y educación gratuitos y de acceso universal. Esos servicios de educación gratuitos y de acceso universal no han creado un país con conciencia de democracia. Ha creado un país de esclavos intelectuales de un sistema que no funciona. Ahí está. Ese es el truco. Es como el Talibán. Si el Talibán takes over in Afghanistan again, you will see the end of education because they don't accept education for women. So that's the end of that. So if you have that kind of mentality, as the Cubans have had to live with this mentality that the government owns everything, that there is no such a thing as private property, in order to maintain a free educational system, free health system, you have to become a slave, an intellectual slave. But that's why you have 16% of the people at the border asking for asylum in the United States. 16% of those arriving there are from Cuba. Why? If you open the border, you know how many Cubans will leave? Millions. I don't know what the population of Cuba is, but hundreds of thousands, let's say, would leave. But the ones who stay behind are people who are doing well under the revolution, under the Castro regime. Bueno, en todo caso, el socialismo ha fallado una vez más en Cuba. Castro afirmó que hay quienes reclaman la importación comercial privada para establecer un sistema no estatal de comercio. Son estas cuestiones que no pueden generar confusión. Hay límites que no podemos rebasar, porque llevaría a la destrucción del socialismo, porque las consecuencias serían irreversibles, conducirían a errores estratégicos y la destrucción misma del socialismo y por ende de la soberanía de la nación. Grandes palabras que no llevan a nada, a ninguna conclusión, digo yo, porque es más palabreo. De eso vivieron los Castro por siempre, del palabreo, los discursos de 8 horas que se echaba don Fidel. Ay, Dios mío, ¿cuándo? ¿Hasta cuándo? Digo yo, ¿hasta cuándo el socialismo en Cuba? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué no le damos un chance a otro experimento? Let's open the border. Let's have free commerce. Let's allow tourism from the United States to come freely back and forth. Okay, we have the president, Joe Biden, who will not hesitate to start that with Cuba. I thought under Clinton that could happen, but we know that he was not able. Politically, it was impossible for him to do it. But I think the country has changed. I think there's more openness in this country towards normalizing relations with Cuba. I hope Biden is able to do something in spite of the Republican opposition. Now, they will have a tough time doing anything through legislation. He could have an executive order because we need to help the Cubans at this point. He's still primer secretario del Partido Comunista. Primer secretario. Recuerden que a esto les gustan todos los títulos grandiosos. Primer secretario del Partido Comunista, don Raúl Castro. Bueno, ahora se terminó el poder de Castro. Yo les digo aquí, y oigan, yo soy medio profeta en este sentido. No hay un nombre Castro asociado con el liderazgo de Cuba. Eso lleva al fin del marxismo en Cuba. Si este señor, ¿cómo se llama? Díaz-Canel, si él abre Cuba, si él le da paso a la democracia en Cuba, y él comete, Miguel Díaz-Canel se llama, ¿sí? Si él comete ese error de abrir la puerta un poco, de repente la puerta queda abierta de par en par y entra por ahí el mercado libre, the free market and democracy. Imagine that, where Cubans will not be afraid to vote for someone who is not a Castro ally, who is not a follower of Marxist ideas. So there is hope. Okay, so Cuba right now is suffering from two things: COVID and Marxism. So now, and also an economy that's not doing well because of Marxism. So this is the end of that, the end of socialism, the end of that, because the only solution is the free market for all the faults of the free market, all the defects. Winston Churchill once said, capitalism is the worst system except for all the others. And that is still true. So there is hope. And so we have great hope for Cuba at this point. And with that, we come to an end with our edition today of the Roundtable, La Mesa Redonda. Se despide Fernando Mendez, Dani Ramos controlando la máquina digital. Los esperamos hasta la próxima.
Saludos amigos, los invitamos a escuchar la mesa redonda de Roundtable, donde discutimos los temas del día, hablando de política, educación y otros temas, locales, regionales y mundiales, por USA la Radio.